This is how you combine continuous integration, continuous delivery, and GitOps in a package that is Kubernetes-native, applies modern principles, and is user-friendly. If somebody would ask me, hey, what would be your recommendation for continuous integration, continuous delivery, GitOps, all of that running in Kubernetes? I would probably recommend the combination of Argo Workflows for pipelines, Argo Events for events, Argo CD for the GitOps part, and I would probably add Prometheus over there to have some metrics, and maybe Clair or something similar for security scanning, and a few other tools. The problem is that combining all those tools together is difficult. It requires a lot of time, and the end result is not something you can just give to everybody in your company and say, hey, there you go, write your pipelines in Argo Workflows format and figure out events and combine it all with Argo CD. You need to spend a lot of time to figure out how those work, how to combine them together, and you would need to spend even more time building a platform of sorts that you can say, hey, there you go, use it. This is the combination that makes a lot of sense. The combination itself does make a lot of sense, but it requires a lot of work from SREs or DevOps, whatever you're calling yourself today, or whichever role you're having, until all that combined is working in a way that you can just give it to others and say, hey, now we have a system for continuous integration, delivery, GitOps, everything you need for your applications from beginning until the end, and the end is in production, really. With all that experience behind me, I set to review Devtron. And initially I was skeptical. Hey, this is yet another CI/CD tool that does random things and it's nothing really special. Until I dig deeper into it and saw the potential. And I must stress the word potential. You will see later why that word is so important. Devtron combines all those tools and a few others together in a meaningful package that is, what would be the word? Very easy to consume. It has its downsides, it has its upsides, but let's postpone the conversation for later. For now, let's take a look at Devtron and see what we'll get. The installation is relatively easy and straightforward. All we have to do is execute Helm install or Helm upgrade and then wait for a while until the solution is up and running. Actually, when I say wait for a while, that is an understatement. It will take approximately 20 minutes, give or take, until everything is up and running. Whether that's too short or too long, we are yet to see because it really depends what we'll get. So let me fast forward to the end of the process so that we see what's in that package. Is it worthwhile 20 minutes of your life? Okay. Let's see whether it's finished, and we should be able to deduce that by the output of the command that I left running in the background. If it says applied, then yes, it says applied. So Devtron is up and running, or at least it should be up and running. Let's see what is included in that package. If you look at the namespaces, there is Argo namespace, which is the default namespace for Argo Workflows. And that seems to be it. Everything else is Devtron something. Let's see what's inside Devtron CD. There are many things over there. Let's see, what did we get? Like APP sync, I'm not sure what that is. There's Argo Rollouts, excellent. That's a really good choice for progressive delivery or deployment or whatever we're calling it today. Canary deployments, for example. Anyways, there is Argo Rollouts, then we have Argo CD, which is for GitOps type of synchronization between Git and whatever is in the cluster. There is Clair for security scanning, good choice. There's some dashboard, probably Devtron itself. Then we got Grafana. I'm not sure whether we can access Grafana. We'll see that in a second. External secrets, that's what I would choose as well, or maybe not. Doesn't matter, it's a good choice, if not the best. Minio for storage, again, great solution. Nuts for events, again, excellent. Git sensor, guard, inception, I'm not sure what that is. CubeWatch lens, that's a strange choice. Why would I need lens if I'm going to see everything through Devtron dashboard? Anyways, we'll check it out later. And we also got a few others. Anyways, the point is that Devtron packaged very good choices into a platform of sorts, and we are yet to see whether they work well together, but so far so good. Half of those would be my favorites, if not more. Now we need to figure out the IP through which Devtron is accessible, and to do that I will execute a simple, or maybe not so simple, anyways, query. It will get me the IP of the service through Devtron UI is accessible. And now we can open it in a browser. So let's see what we're getting. By default, user is admin. That was to be expected. We need password. I do not know what the password is, but I can query the secret that contains the password. So let me do that quickly. It is curious that the secret comes from Argo CD server, but there is a relation between the two, so I will give it a slug. Okay, I'm logging in. Let's see what's going on. At the beginning, we need to go through some basic setup. I wish I could have specified those values when executing Helm install or Helm upgrade. I checked. They are not available as the values of the chart, so we need to specify them manually. But I guess for the users who like web UIs, that's quite okay, or welcome even, right? So the first one would be host UI. I'm going to use nip.io to simulate a real domain. I mean, I could continue using Devtron with the IP, but hey, why not specify the domain? However, since I do not have a real domain, I will use nip.io. I will just copy the IP, add Devtron as the prefix and nip.io as the suffix, and there you go, you have a simulation of a domain. Next, we need to configure GitOps. We do not know yet what it is, but let's see what the settings are. And it is straightforward. We need to select between GitHub or GitLab or Azure. Suspiciously, there is no Bitbucket, which just proves my theory that Bitbucket is dying slowly and a terrible death. Anyways, let me go back. I can type git host, GitHub organization name, and the username and the token. And now be careful, because I already suffered through this. You need to use GitHub organization. You cannot use Devtron with your personal account. It needs to be an organization, at least if you're using GitHub. So do not even try using it with your personal account without having a GitHub organization. That will fail. I tried that. I spent an hour trying to figure out why it's failing, because the button save said everything is okay. It wasn't. So make sure that you're using an organization if you're using GitHub. Finally, the last step is to specify Docker registry. And at this moment, I'm dissatisfied. I really don't like when people call it Docker registry. It is not Docker registry, it is container registry. Because it is not only about Docker, it is not only about Docker Hub. You can use almost any other container registry like ECR or ACR or whatever you might be using. Anyways, let me go through those options fast. There we go. Pum, 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 pum. Save. We are finished with the basic configuration. We might come back to this page later to fine-tune it, but for now, we are ready to go. Now, the star of Devtron. The main feature of Devtron is all around applications, and we are going to explore them in a few minutes. For now, I want to take it easy and go through the easier option or the faster option, which is charts. And you're now probably thinking, hey, every single Kubernetes dashboard can deploy Helm charts. What's special about it? Well, you will see in a second what's special, because there is something very special. And if you paid attention to the tools, you probably do know what's special. If you don't, continue watching and you'll see. So I can select among a few charts. I mean, there is more than a few. I can extend the number of charts I'm using by adding additional registries. But for this demo, those that are baked in should be enough. So let me select something. What should I go for? Let's say Nginx, just as a demo, right? Nothing special. So there is a description, chart version, and a few other things. Nothing special so far. So let me click the deploy button and see what we'll get there. I can type the application name and the project. Project is specific to Devtron. We'll see it later or not. It's not really very exciting. The environment where we want to deploy, which is misleading. Environment is really a namespace. I don't like when products change the name of something that is already named. Anyways, let me select the environment / namespace. And what else do we have here? The rest are typical settings, like chart version and the values file. I can modify that values file. I will change the number of replicas to 3, for example. As I said before, almost every Kubernetes dashboard can do those things. So this is nothing special so far. And if you're curious whether there will be anything special, you'll see. Let me deploy this chart and then you will see what makes this special. Now it is progressing, it is deploying the chart, blah, blah, blah. All standard things that you can see in every other tool. Now let me take a quick look whether the pods are really running. And yes, the pods are there. So the chart was deployed. Again, this is pretty standard stuff. However, there is something that is not obvious by using Devtron, at least from the UI. And we can discover that something by listing all the applications. And if you're familiar with Argo CD, you know what's coming. Applications are Argo CD resources that tell it where is the Git repository and what is the path and what's or not, that tells Argo CD the location of the manifest. And let's take a look. Yes, there is an application, and this is what makes Devtron special, at least when compared with typical Kubernetes dashboards. Instead of applying the chart directly inside of the cluster, it created an Argo CD application. I will explain soon why that is important, but for now, let me retrieve the application and see the YAML representation of that application. I want to check something. And there we go. There is a repo URL pointing to a repository that I never created and to a specific path inside of that repository. So let me take a look at that repo and see what's inside it. And there we are. If we go to the path directory, we can see that there is a Helm chart with all the information about the application. Now, this is very important. This is how GitOps works. So let me explain the process in a nutshell of what really happened. When we told Devtron that we want a chart, it did not apply the chart to the Kubernetes cluster as most of the other tools would do. Instead, it created a new Git repository, and then it created an Argo CD application, and then it told Argo CD through that application to observe that repository and specific path in that repository and deploy whatever is defined there. From now on, we know exactly what we have in the cluster. We know the desired state of that specific application because it is in Git, and Argo CD is doing synchronization. So this is opposite from how we are traditionally used to deploy applications. Instead of a push method, we have a pull method. Argo CD is pulling information from a Git repository, and Devtron is making sure that the application, Argo CD application, is created. That's a one-time deal. And from there on, all the changes to that application are applied by changing the manifests in that Git repository instead of applying them directly to a cluster. So we have the desired state defined in Git, and we have Argo CD that makes sure that the actual state, which is our cluster, is the same as the desired state. It is easy, logical, and yet brilliant because almost nobody is doing this, at least not within the category of similar tools like, CI/CD pipelines and so on and so forth. And if we go back to the Devtron UI, we can see some sort of Kubernetes dashboard where we see the deployments, replica sets, pods, and all the additional information we might need related to that chart. The chart that was just deployed to the cluster through the manifest stored in Git, and Devtron itself made sure that the repository exists, that the charts are pushed there, and so on and so forth. Now, before we proceed and get to the main star of Devtron, which is applications, let me go back to settings and see whether there is anything else interesting over there. There are projects, which is a way how to organize different applications and group them in a way. I think it's a bit strange because we normally do that through namespaces, and as you will see later, Devtron also understands the namespaces. Anyways, if you need projects, whatever the projects are, you have it in Devtron. I will move on to the next interesting thing. And that is the setup of clusters and environments. I have only one cluster, so I will skip the clusters part. You just need to trust me that you can manage applications in more than one cluster with Devtron. And we are going to move into environments because environments is what I'm interested in right now. So what should I do? Let's say that I have two environments. I have staging and production. So I will create one, I will create staging, a few settings, nothing really special, and then I will create production. Again, it's only about filling in a few fields and then clicking that save button. That's it. It's easy, nothing really special. I just want to make sure that I have two environments, staging and production, so that I can see how Devtron works in multi-environment setup and whether it can help me do what I want to do. And what I want to do is to build and test and do all the things I do with applications. Some people call it CI. I think that's misleading, but anyways, I want to build and run some tests and what's or not, and then deploy to staging and then deploy to production. Let's see whether Devtron can help me with that. Essentially, it's going to be built, deploy to staging, and then deploy to production. There are other settings we can use to fine-tune what Devtron does. I will skip through them partly because they're boring, and more importantly because I'm impatient. I want to see applications in action. But before I do that, I will delete Nginx charts simply because I have no need for Nginx in this context. I wanted to deploy the chart only to show you how you can do that. So let's create a new application. What do we have here? At the beginning, it's very basic. I will type the name of the application, select the project, and choose a template. Actually, I will use the blank template because I was too lazy to create templates. You should just know that you can have templates that will simplify reproduction of the same patterns over and over again. But for now, blank templates should do. And now we need to go through a bunch of settings. It might sound overwhelming, but it's relatively easy, intuitive, or partly intuitive. We'll see whether it's intuitive. For now, let's see which settings do we have. And the first in line is Git material. Now, why do you call it Git material is beyond my understanding. But hey, it's a way to specify the repository where your application is. That's what Git material is. Essentially, we need to specify Git repo URL and click the save button and see what's waiting behind the corner. What's the next thing that I need to specify? And that next thing is docker build config. I can specify the registry. I will use Docker Hub because it's most convenient. It's not the best option, but it is the most convenient one. And in that context, Docker repository, which again, it's not Docker repository because Docker Hub is only one of the repositories. Anyways, the repository is my user. You use your user, do not use my user / the name of the application. And since the repository with my application already has Docker file, I can just click the save configuration button and then next. And now we have a deployment template, which is a way to say this is Helm values file without calling it Helm values. Anyways, Devtron will create a Helm chart for me, and all I have to do to fine-tune how my application behaves is modify a couple of things. And in my specific case, the only thing I need to change are ports. The application in question is listening on the port 80. So I will change 8080 to 80 and take a look whether there is anything else interesting for me to play with. So what else can I change? There's a bunch of things over there. I will not go into details of everything you can use to fine-tune your applications, but choose one. Ingress. Yes, Ingress is a good choice because I would probably like my application to be accessible through a custom domain. But since I don't have a custom domain, I will use nip.io, and to construct the nip.io domain, I will need the IP, and I do not know what is the IP or whether Devtron even has Ingress installed. I will just assume that it does have Ingress installed or that it will install Ingress. Since it packages basically everything I might need for delivering applications, I assume it has some sort of Ingress. And I will guess that that Ingress is accessible through the same IP as Devtron itself, so I will use that to construct the host. If it doesn't work, we'll figure it out later. Next, we need to create a workflow. Workflow is essentially a pipeline that, in case of Devtron, is split between CI and CD. If you ask me, there is no CI and CD. CD is a superset of CI. Anyways, we can create a workflow, and the first part of the workflow is CI. We can choose continuous integration, or we can link an existing pipeline, or we can use an incoming webhook. I will go with the first option and choose continuous integration. And since this is a simple repository with only the main branch, and I will click the create pipeline button and see what else do I need to do to make this work. Now this is a nice representation. It says I have a Git repository, I have a CI pipeline. Let me see what's inside of that CI pipeline. We can execute it automatically or manually. Automatically means whenever we make a change to a Git repository. Manual would mean, hey, when we click a button, I do not want to click buttons whenever I want to release something. So automatic is the choice. What it does essentially is build a container image and push that image to a container registry. But there is an option to extend what it does by default by creating pre-build or post-build stages. And what we put in those stages is whatever we would like to have. And the good thing is that it is extremely easy. We just need to specify the command that we want to run in each of those stages. And I will just echo something because I'm too lazy to figure out what I want to do for this demo. So there will be an echo in the pre-build stage and an echo in the post-build stage. But you should do something more serious. Like before you build an image, you should probably run some unit tests, and you might want to do something serious after you build an image. But in my case, it will be the easy option, just an echo message, and we move on to the next stage. Actually, wait a moment. There is a big problem here, potential big problem, because yes, I can execute any command I want, but there is no option, at least not easily visible and accessible, to let me specify a container image that should be used to run those commands. Because hey, if I want to run unit tests, I would like to run those unit tests in an image that has JUnit or Go testing or whatever you're using. Or maybe I would like to run some performance tests with JMeter or what's not. I'm really missing the option here to specify a container inside of which the commands will be executed. Maybe that's available somehow, somewhere, but it is not obvious how I would do that. I'm not even sure at this point what will be the container inside of which those commands will be executed. But I promised to myself I will try to be positive, and this is a major drawback. It is probably a reflection that I did not yet spend sufficient time with Devtron or not. Anyways, let's move on to the next subject and see what else is waiting for us. And now we can extend the pipeline by clicking that plus sign, which will give us the option to deploy the application, which in case of Devtron is called CD, even though actually the whole pipeline is continuous delivery. But hey, doesn't matter. Let's see what CD is. And CD is extremely easy. We just need to specify the environment where we want to deploy stuff, which, as we already noticed, is essentially a namespace. And to choose the deployment strategy, and this is interesting, or at least potentially interesting. For staging, I will go with the easy one, rolling updates, because I do not need more in staging. But later on, when we get to production, I would really like to see how canary deployments work. We can also enable security scanning, but since I would be embarrassed for you to see how insecure this silly application is, I will skip that option. You should just remember that you can and that you should run security scanning of everything you do, and that is very easy with the Devtron. You just need to select the checkbox and there you go. Now let me go back to the CD pipeline and see whether there is something else that we can do with it. And just as CI has pre-build and post-build stages, we have pre-deployment and post-deployment stages, and that could be very useful. I might want to do some things before the deployment happens, and I definitely want to do some things after the deployment. I might want to run functional tests or whichever other types of tests I have that depend on the application being up and running, which is essentially everything except unit tests. Now, this is inconsistent. Pre and post stages in the CI pipeline are a field where we can type any command we want to execute, but in case of deployment, the format is completely different. I have something called config and then a sample script. I do not understand why a sample of a config is a script, but that's not that important. What does matter is that this is something completely different than in the other pipeline, and I cannot comprehend why is it inconsistent. I would expect those things to be the same or follow the same logic, and there is no clear explanation in the UI, and I checked the docs. There is no clear explanation in the docs either of what that is and what are the available options and why this is different and what is the benefit of one format compared to the other. You probably noticed I do not like tools that are not consistent throughout the whole life cycle of whatever they're managing. Anyways, for simplicity reasons, I will skip the pre and post stages for the deployment. You should just remember that you can run things before something is deployed and after something is deployed. Now we're getting to the finish line. I would like my application to be deployed to production after it was deployed to staging and after all the tests, those that I would normally specify in the post stage passed. So in my head, it's a single flow that starts with building something and running some unit tests and then deploying it to staging and then running more tests, and then if those tests pass, deploying it to production, which might have manual confirmation that yes, I do want to deploy to production, or it might be automated, depending on how much I trust the tests executed after it was deployed to production. So I will select production as the environment and specify Canary as the deployment strategy. Canary makes no sense outside of production, but in production, Canary is probably the best strategy to deploy something to production, as long as it is done right. And we are yet to discover whether this is done right or no. For now, I will just outline what I mean by done right. Canary would mean that we deploy a new release and redirect only small portion of the traffic to that new release, and then we monitor metrics in, let's say, Prometheus, and if everything goes right, then we increase the traffic going to the new release to 20%, 30%, continuously monitoring the metrics and making sure that everything works fine. And eventually, if none of the thresholds were reached, we would get 100%, and then our new release would be fully up and running and the old release would be shut down. So Canary deployments are all about gradually increasing the reach of the new release and making sure that everything is working as expected before increasing the reach by querying metrics somewhere, wherever that somewhere is. I can only assume assume that that's what Devtron does, so let's move on to the next stage. Actually, there is a settings button, so let me see what it shows. What is the canary deployments in Devtron? Actually, by default, this is silly. It just sets the weight of the new release to 25%, and then it waits for a while, and then it increases that percentage until it reaches 100%. That's completely pointless. There is no point in waiting for a while and then increasing the weight if you're not measuring whether it's successful or not, if you're not running tests or querying metrics or whatever you need to do. So I need more, and I'm not sure how to get more. I can edit that field, but I do not know what to put there. I should probably consult the documentation. Let me see what's in documentation. How can I connect it to metrics in Prometheus, and what are the available fields? Okay, this is silly. This is what we have: max surge, max unavailable, set weight, and duration. There is nothing obvious in this documentation that would help me deduce how I can tell Devtron when to move forward and when to roll back. What is success? What is a failure? How do I connect to metrics? How do I run tests, or whatever I should do with canary deployments? Canary deployments done like this are useless, and I would not be this harsh if I would not know that Devtron did not invent its own way of doing canary deployments, which is the correct thing to do. Devtron is using Argo Rollouts, and Argo Rollouts is a brilliant tool that allows me to do exactly what I want to do, except that there is no mention that Devtron is using Argo Rollouts. It is hidden, which we will discuss later, and there is no mention how I can do what I want to do in documentation. So if I would not know that Argo Rollouts is involved, I would not know that I can actually do what I want to do, but Devtron is hiding it from me, so I will ignore the fact that I know Argo Rollouts from before and conclude that, judging by the documentation, I cannot do what I want to do, and this way to employ canary releases is just silly. Now, another troubling thing is that I cannot deploy to production after I deploy to staging. I can only deploy to one environment or two environments or three environments in parallel after the CI part, and that's not what I want to do. I do not want to go to production at the same time as going to staging. I want to go to production after I go to staging. And the problem is potential lack of flexibility. If I would like to do what I want to do, I would need to have different branches and different pipelines or workflows or whatever it's called here, and then I would define CI and deployment to staging whenever I push to the staging branch, and I would have another round of CI and deployment to production whenever I merge from staging to production, and that might fit some people, but it doesn't fit me in this case. It sounds silly that I cannot chain different deployments one after another and that they all must go after the CI part. But hey, happy thoughts, let's continue. So far Devtron looks amazing. There are just few things that should be polished, let's say. I am very harsh on Devtron because I think that this is the tool that has a lot of potential, and it just needs a couple of additional pushes to make it absolutely amazing. So this is for your own sake, Devtron. I'm scolding you because I know that you can be better. Okay, this is the moment of truth. We have everything set up. It might not be 100% of what I want to do, but nevertheless, it is very promising. And now we can test it out. We can see whether it really works as expected. And we will do that by making a silly change to, let's say, README, and then committing and pushing those files to a Git repository. And from there on, Devtron should do everything else, right? From now on, I, as a developer, should be writing code and maybe running some local tests and what's not, and then pushing changes to Git and forgetting everything else. Everything else is fully automated except deployment to production, which I set to manual. So let me go to build history and see what's going on. And we can see that the CI pipeline is running, but it was executed slightly differently than what you might be used to. Unlike Jenkins or Circle CI or whichever other pipeline tool you might be using, Devtron did not create a webhook that is notifying Devtron whenever I push changes to a Git repository. Instead, it is pulling for changes, which has a downside. The CI pipeline might not run immediately after I push something to Git because that depends on the pull frequency. However, there is an upside. I can lock my cluster so that nothing can access it, including webhooks from Git, because everything is happening inside of the cluster. Cluster might go out to get information like, hey, did you change a Git repository? But nothing is coming in it. It can be fully locked, and that can make your cluster more secure. Essentially, Devtron is using the same logic for pipeline as the logic employed by Argo CD or Flux and similar GitOps tools. It is pulling for information instead of waiting for push notifications. We can see in the logs what's going on. I will fast forward to the end of the process because, frankly speaking, this is boring. Now that the CI pipeline was finished, we can go to the deployment history and see what's happening in staging. In my case, it is progressing, but it shouldn't take long. So let me jump to the terminal and see what is deployed, what is running in the staging namespace. And we got the pod and the service and the replica set, which created the pod, and we got ingress because I enabled ingress in the settings when I was defining the application itself. So let me copy the host from the ingress and open it in browser and see whether my application is really working and it is performing and doing whatever the application should be doing. And no, we are getting Devtron instead of my application, and I think I know what the problem is. I use the same IP as the Devtron, thinking that Devtron might be accessible through some form of ingress, but it is not. It is exposed as a node port service. Ingress is probably not there. Let me double check whether there is ingress pre-installed. It would be strange if there isn't, because Devtron packs everything I could imagine I might need, so ingress is one of those things. It must be there. Let's just see where it is. And I can do that by listing all the services in all the namespaces. If there is ingress, there must be a service. And if there is a service, then it should be load balancer or node port as a minimum so that it is accessible from outside. And then ingress takes over. But no, there isn't. Either ingress is not installed, or it is not installed by default, or it is hidden somewhere. Anyways, I will install ingress myself and then change the address of my application, and that should work. There we are, that's the IP. I will copy that IP, and then I will go to the application settings and change the host of the application to be that IP with the suffix nip.io, so that I have a simulation of a domain. Actually, it is a domain, but not mine. Now it should hopefully work. I'm still disappointed that the ingress is not packaged with Devtron, or that it is not obvious how to use it. Nevertheless, I will make another silly change to the application, push that change to Git repository, and that should result in another CI pipeline running, and after that CI pipeline, the deployment should be executed, and my application should hopefully be up and running with the new domain. And there we are, the CI pipeline was executed, my application was built, and after that the deployment started through Argo CD, and I should have the new release of my application up and running, and that new release has new host address, and I should be able to access it. So let me retrieve all the resources, including ingress, from the staging namespace, copy the address and open it in browser and see whether my application is finally accessible. And there we are, big success. The application is up and running, it is accessible. We had a few hiccups down the road, but Devtron did it at least until staging. Let's see what's happening with production. Now in production, we have a potential problem. And that problem is that there is no way to specify differences between an application running in, let's say, staging and production. In this specific case, I would want my application running in production to be accessible through different hosts, because staging and production are different. They should have different hosts. But there is no obvious way for me to find out how to do that. I would probably need to split it into branches and create two applications instead of one application with different variations or something like that. So I will go there and initiate deployment to production, which should result in Devtron pushing changes to the Git repository of the application, and then Argo CD picking up those changes and applying them to the cluster, and then Argo Rollouts doing canary releases. Now the nice thing about manual deployment to an environment, when we choose to manually deploy somewhere, is that Devtron shows us the list of all the images, and we can choose which specific release we want to deploy to an environment when the choice is to do it manually. That's really nice, I like that part. However, the deployment failed. There is something wrong, and this is another potential problem with Devtron. There is no easy way to figure out what's wrong when something goes wrong, at least not through the UI. I would need to go to the terminal and then go through the resources, but since Devtron is effectively hiding which tools it is using, it is not obvious unless you dig through it that it is using Argo Rollouts, so I might want to check the logs of Argo Rollouts to see what's wrong, or maybe something happened with Argo CD and I would need to go to the logs of Argo CD. I could theoretically use the web UI of Argo CD, but it was not created, it was not exposed through Devtron, because again, Devtron is hiding the tools it is using. So given enough time and not sufficient help from Devtron itself, I could probably figure out what is wrong with deployment to production. I will skip that part because I think I know what's wrong. Probably Ingress is complaining that it does not want to deploy two applications with exactly the same hosts, or it could be something else. I will not bore you by watching me trying to debug what the problem is. What is important here is that Devtron is not really providing sufficient info for you to find out what's wrong when something is wrong, or at least that info is not easily accessible. It is not clear where that information is within the Devtron UI. So let me stop the demo. You saw enough. There is much more to see about Devtron, but I do not want to make this video last for hours. So let me stop the hands-on demo here and let's discuss Devtron. Should you use it? Is it any good? Let's start with positive things, with pros of Devtron. And there are many. I will not name them all, but only those that really matter. Devtron uses the same tools I would choose to use if I would be making product like that. It leverages the power of Argo CD, of Argo Workflows and Argo Rollouts. It has Clair inside, it has Grafana, it has quite a few other tools, and packages all those tools into something that is very enjoyable to use, very easy, relatively intuitive, and so on and so forth. I love how user-friendly Devtron is. The process it is enforcing is correct. It is doing CI/CD type of pipelines. It is leveraging GitOps. It is storing all the information in Git instead of manipulating clusters at runtime. And that's absolutely excellent. The process behind Devtron is the process that I believe we should be adopting more or less. But it has negative sides as well. To begin with, it is hiding the tools that it is using, which I think is a huge mistake, because the tools that it is using and wrapping around and building on top of are absolutely amazing. Argo CD, Workflows, Rollouts, Clair, and other tools should not be hidden from you. Argo CD, for example, has an excellent UI that is completely hidden from Devtron users. And hiding things is good. There is nothing wrong in hiding things if you think that you can replace those things with something better. So if Devtron would give me equally good or better UI to see the resources deployed, just as Argo CD is allowing me to see the resources with the tree and what's or not, I would not mind swapping Argo CD UI for Devtron. But Devtron is not giving me that, even though it is hiding the good parts of Argo CD. As for the pipelines part, I think that I do not have a special need to see Argo Workflows UI. So I'm really missing the UI of Argo CD because it's absolutely awesome, and Devtron is not even trying to replace it. Another potential issue, and probably the big one for me, is the way Devtron organizes the repositories with the manifests and everything. It assumes that all the manifests for all the environments of an application should be in the repository of an application, and I think that that is a mistake. I prefer much more the model in which I have a repository of an application with the manifest of that application, and then separate repository for an environment that would have Argo CD applications with all the links to the base manifest, and then I could modify slightly how an application behaves in production compared to staging or other environments. And if you're familiar with Argo CD, you would know that that model is called app of apps or application set, depending on which resource you're using. So I'm really missing the Argo CD model called application set or application of applications. I would really like to see Devtron splitting those into different repositories, one for each environment and one for each application. And then environment repositories would contain application manifests that link to the base manifests in the repositories of each of the applications. And in that way, I would have a clear view of what is running in production, what is running in staging, or whichever other environment. I would have an easy way to customize my application running in production without repeating myself, and so on and so forth. The way Devtron organized the applications managed by Argo CD is not ideal, is not even very good. And the last problem I have with Devtron is that it is not doing the same things with itself as what it is telling you to do with your application. If the definitions of your application should be in repositories, why aren't there definitions of Devtron itself in a repository? Why isn't Devtron itself managed using GitOps principles? Why isn't that good enough for Devtron, but it is good enough for your applications? So I would like Devtron to apply the same principles for itself as it is trying to convince you to use for your applications. And those principles are good. I would just like to see them employed on Devtron itself. Now, besides those negative things, Devtron is amazing. I love the direction of the tool. I might not be convinced that it is 100% where it should be, but the direction is absolutely amazing. And if the team continues down the path it is going right now, and if it polishes the product and adds a bit more flexibility, adds better integration with Argo CD and other tools, makes them more visible and makes them more flexible, it will be a great choice. Actually, it is a great choice right now. You should try Devtron right away. It's just that I am maybe too demanding. I might expect from the tools too much. So you might want to ignore me altogether. Try Devtron and let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments whether you like it, whether you don't, and so on and so forth.